Chargers. Touchdown, UCLA.
With USC great and NFL stud, Frosty Rucker.
The Trojans back in front.
And LAFB founder Ryan Dyrud on the Believe Podcast Network and LAFBnetwork.com. This is your destination for Los Angeles football.
What's going on, Los Angeles? Welcome into the LA Football Show. I'm your host, Ryan Dyrud, joined by the boys around me on all sides. Excited to get into this because we got some big news for the Rams. Before we get into it, though, let's welcome in all the fellows from the LA Football Network. Start with my man, Ryan Anderson, Skinny T, beat writer for your Rams. What's up, my brother? How you doing, man?
Doing fantastic. Another great day in Rams crazy free agency. So it's good to be here.
Yeah, you can never sleep when you're covering the Rams. So
No.
Our host of the Bruin Bible and Draft is in session, my man Will Decker, who's going to be joining us in LA full time in just a month. What's up, my brother? How you doing?
Dude, I'm doing good. I'm super stoked to get down to LA. Big Rams news today, and I think we're going to be talking some college football too, which I'm excited about. So always great to join these fellows on a live show.
Yeah, absolutely glad. Thanks for joining me. Yeah, we're talking Rams, Chargers, and we're going to hit some Trojans and Bruins too. Hit it all on this. And no better to do that because he knows all of LA, host of Drafts in Session, does a little bit of everything for the LA Football Network. The madman himself, Jamal Madni, at LAFB Jams on Twitter. What's up, brother? How we doing?
Ride or die, great to be here. We just got one missing piece right now. You know, we're just missing Danny Dub and the Fab Five back together again. So I'm excited to be here as always.
Yes. Yeah. Dan is on a baby moon right now, celebrating soon to be daughter with his wife. So their last little getaway. So, and he was just, we're just going to throw Dan under the bus right now because he's not here. He was just in Hawaii last weekend at a wedding, and then now he's at a baby moon at the beach again. I'm like, this guy's living the dream right now. I guess he's getting it all out of the way before the kid comes.
We're all working hard, Ryan, to grow up to be like Danny Dub. That's the goal.
Yeah, exactly. Skinny T, what are you drinking over there? I saw a little dark.
This is the Elijah Craig.
Oh,
Right there.
I love Elijah Craig.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Is that the barrel series or just like their classic?
It's the 94 proof father of bourbon.
The classic.
Since we're talking about fathers.
There you go. The Danny Dub of bourbons. So
yeah, exactly.
I got Mr. James here, Jim Bean, my good friend. So sipping on that as always. But gentlemen, we're not here to talk whiskey right now, sipping on it, but we're talking some celebration Rams. I'm excited to talk to Jamal because our last time we had Jamal on, I'm sure hopefully now feeling a little better about the prognosis of this Rams offseason. But for those that haven't heard or just want to hear it again, Bobby Wagner, the great Bobby Wagner, 8-time All-Pro or something crazy like that in his career. Basically averages 160 tackles a season, is signing with the Los Angeles Rams, 5-year deal, $50 million, worth up to $65 million in incentives. Jamal, let's just start with you. How were you surprised when I know there's been rumors about it, but were you surprised it actually came to fruition? And what was your thought process on when it came down and the news broke?
Yeah, Ryan. I mean, it was a little bit of an EKG there, for the last week to 10 days, because it felt like the Rams were in a really good spot to get Wagner. Maybe a week and a half ago, he came and visited. We heard some comments out of Sean McVay, feeling really good about things. And then it went a little zero dark 30, if you will, for about a week or so. And then this noise about the Ravens, potentially being, the favorites there, the inside track. There was a lot of buzz about the Cowboys as well. So it almost felt like today, it was such an interesting day on Twitter where so much of Ravens Nation was just so ready. I mean, you saw kind of the commentary where it's like, oh, Bobby Wagner has followed Lamar Jackson. Oh, Bobby Wagner likes a Ray Lewis historic video. And it just felt like it was headed that way to Baltimore. And then when you saw the notification that he's going to the Rams, it was really just the most pleasant of surprises as you can possibly have. And really thrilled for the team. And this really fills that void of losing out on Von Miller. And I think we're back to kind of homeostasis, if you will, like back to equilibrium. It's kind of you're getting you're reloading the same level of talent now to sort of come back and take another run at it when you look at the losses as well as the additions. So definitely a much different madman today, not so madman when it comes to Rams offseason. Really, really well done and kind of got it back to neutral.
Yeah. Speaking of the social, I'm always curious how much these players just are like, I'm just going to mess with fans on social media. Cause you always like, as soon as someone unfollows someone, it's like, or remove something from their bio, everyone freaks out, loses their stuff. They had the Von Miller stuff about, the Broncos in the offseason, and then he signs with the Bills out of nowhere. So I wonder how much players just like, I'm just going to just play the puppet strings a little bit. But
it
Ryan,
Richard Sherman was Wagner's agent here in terms of, you want to talk about play the puppet strings with all his tweets of like, oh, something is imminent, or, it's in a holding pattern, or, Sherman was like a day trader at JP Morgan, the last 12 hours, it felt like. So that was really, and I think, he's got such a mischievous personality as well. So I think it added to the intrigue.
Yeah. Ryan, before I go to you about what Wagner means to the Rams, but Will, I feel like a lot of teams, okay, not a lot of teams. There's some teams that, and I think the Rams are one of them, when players leave, because they can't, like Bobby Trees, for instance, had to trade Bobby Trees, Todd Gurley, all these guys. We see Jared Goff leave. But usually after a year or so, everyone's like, you know what? I respect the Rams organization, had a great time there. We see that with like the Broncos organization specifically. It's like players always end up going back when they retire because they had a great time. Something about the Seahawks lately, it seems like they've just like scorned a lot of players. Like Richard Sherman seems like he hates the Seahawks. He ended up going to San Francisco, and now he's like pulling against them. Bobby Wagner, obviously very unhappy with that. Russell Wilson was pretty vocal about after he left, like being so happy to be out of there almost in a sense. What's your thought, Will, on just what Seattle's doing and why players are just, especially with Pete Carroll being such a players guy, is it top down, you think, or like higher level, or why is it just the scorning of the Seahawks organization, in your opinion? It's a loaded question.
It's a lot of different things. I think communication's a big one. I saw the tweet that Bobby Wagner put out when he got cut. He goes, I had to find out from my phone, ESPN telling me that I got cut from the Seahawks, instead of John Schneider, the GM, reaching out to do it himself. Yeah. Madman and I have talked about this a lot off air. I think when Pete, the infamous play in the Super Bowl, it seems like everything's gone down a little bit downhill since then. When they won that first Super Bowl in a rout against Denver, we were like ready to count the amount of Super Bowls this team was going to win. They had Russell Wilson on a rookie contract. They had Bobby Wagner on a rookie contract at that time. Best secondary I've ever seen as a football fan. Legion of Boom, hands down. Marshawn Lynch. They had no holes on that roster. They had a great coach. Everyone was willing to play there. I think it's the abruptness on how they cut the team, the way that last Super Bowl stinks in their mouth, and just a combination of, not giving the players what exactly they need, because let's be honest, Russell Wilson was complaining about the situation there. Nothing really happened until he got traded. That offense was stagnant at best, and that's a big reason why I'm putting an MVP pick on Russell Wilson when he goes to the Broncos, given what I've seen from him doing, in the workouts out there in Southern California, an offense that's going to be tailor-made to his skill set. I just think it's a lack of appreciation from the coach and the GM. That would be my opinion on the matter. And Seattle's free-falling, man. They're in full rebuild mode. Drew Lock's the quarterback there at the moment. That's not a situation I'd like to play for. I'm interested to see what Seattle does, because they've got a long ways to get back to the top, especially with a coach that's in his 70s. It doesn't have a lot of time left to coach.
Yeah. Earl Thomas was another one that left very unhappy and literally
flipped off the middle finger he had when he was leaving the field. Like that is as crazy as it's. I've never seen nothing like that before on a football field. So when Earl Thomas is flipping your sideline, the bird leaving the field, something's not, going right there in Seattle.
Yeah, because that wasn't his whole thing too. Like he was trying, or he wanted to hold out for an extension. They wouldn't give him one, and they ended up tearing his knee up. So he's basically like, wow, I just got totally screwed or something like that. But yeah, it's crazy how it seemed for many years, at least maybe it was a cover up, that it was such a players organization and players love there. And then there's just such a falling out. And again, Ryan, I'm not holding out on you, but just because Jamal knows Pete Carroll so well, do you think, Jamal, like part of it, Pete Carroll being a college guy, and I know but he's not like a Nick Saban type at all, but somehow it's still, when you're a college coach, you have a lot of authority authoritarian control. Do you think maybe he operates like that? Or do you think it's more John Schneider and just the way the GM is handling things?
Ryan, it's so fascinating, the parallels between Pete's tenure at USC and his tenure with the Seahawks. It's staggering in terms of the mirror image. I mean, I was at USC during the Pete days, know the ins and outs of that dynasty. And it was very similar in terms of, if you go back to that 05 Rose Bowl where SC was on the cusp of 3 straight national championships in history, they get stuffed, Lendale White gets stuffed on that 4th and 2. SC was never the same after that play. And similarly, the Seahawks have never been the same after not giving Marshawn the ball on 2nd and goal from the 1-yard line and the Malcolm Butler interception. If you look at, SC had Lendale White, Reggie Bush, Matt Leinart, arguably the greatest backfield in college football history. And if you go and look at the 06, 07, 08, and 09 USC Trojans, the drop-off of offensive talent was staggering. It was almost as if Pete couldn't, sustain. Pete has always been great at building a program, but then that sustainability has always been in question. And when you look at the dysfunction of people leaving that USC program, Lendale White had very negative things to say about Pete Carroll on his way out. Mark Sanchez was supposed to be a 2-year starter. He bolted after 1 year, primarily because of a lack of connectivity with Pete Carroll. And now when you look at it from Seattle's point of view, you get to that mountaintop, you can't kind of close that deal to repeat, and you have all of these players leaving on very bad conditions. What it shows is that Pete is a big energy guy. He's a big culture guy when he's in control. And when you hear it the first time, it's very refreshing. But that level of control becomes very difficult to sustain when you've heard it over and over again. I remember Dwayne Wade said something similar about like the Miami Heat team, with LeBron and Wade and Bosch and the Heatles. He said, by year 4, we just couldn't really, we just didn't like each other as much anymore. All the jokes were stale. All the conversation was stale. Everything we did was stale. And Pete Carroll kind of has a staleness effect to him. And he's a great builder. He's a great infusion of energy. But his inability to sustain was something that was evident at USC, and it's evident now with the Seahawks.
That's a great point. Will, did you want to jump in with something?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up with Madman. He kind of, took the point there, but the honeymoon phase, it can only last for so long. And it seems like he comes in on great terms each and every time, whether it be SC, whether it be the Seahawks, and just gets tiresome after a while. So, I mean, everything I was about to say, Madman kind of summed up perfectly for me. But, it's one of those things. I think the players are just tired of playing for him. And that's just a natural cycle in most relationships in sports. One coach is going to be there. How many times do we see the Popovich Duncan situation? I mean, even Belichick, Brady, they got tired of one another. They had to move on after the most success we've seen in the National Football League. So it's natural, but Pete's have kind of crashed and burned in a way that are memorable to sports fans in a lot of ways.
Yeah. It's such a great point though, Jamal, because I think Pete is different in there's coaches like, the Bill Parcells, the old school that like grind you out. Like these pros are like, I can't play for this guy anymore. He's wearing me out. I think you made a good point, Jamal, that Pete maybe isn't that way, but it just gets stale. Like, okay, I'm sick of hearing the same rah speak. Like he might, when I played high school ball, every year we'd have a different theme. I remember one year we had like some like die every day was our theme, like the dumbest thing. And then one year was like some Greek saying, what was it? Thanatos Kathe Mira or something. I can't remember, but some different things. It was like trying to like inspire you, but it was like after by my 4th year, I was like, all right, these sayings are like, yeah, they're different, but it's like the same old thing. Like it's dumb. And Pete almost.
The only thing I would close with there is, you're absolutely right, is, it's hard to be a one-trick pony. And when you look at the truly all-time greats, when you look at Saban, you look at Belichick, you look at others, the theme that comes to mind is this ability to reinvent themselves. Saban was a defensive guy, run the football with his first 3 national championships at Alabama. They never really had a quarterback, that was really sort of dynamic. And then you sort of look at, Tua and Mac Jones and And now on this lineage goes, you know, he brought in Lane Kiffin, he brought in Sark. He understood that he needed to reinvent himself, that what worked for the first set of championships isn't going to work moving forward. He has to sort of evolve. When you look at Belichick being such a defensive guy, and then you look at teams like the 07 Patriots, you know, breaking scoring records, bringing in guys like Randy Moss and Welker, sort of reinventing yourself in that way. And Pete's always done it one way. You know, he's the great basketball player that can only go right or only go left, or, you know, only a 3-point shooter. And he's never really had a counter move as a coach. And you can only last so long in that regard. And that's why you sort of, you peak and then you peter out.
Yeah. Yeah. He didn't have the counter move. And then also his GM, John Schneider, didn't either, because look at John Schneider. I mean, has there ever been a marquee free agent signing with Seattle? I mean, the biggest one was the trade for Jamal Adams, which was probably the worst trade I can think of in recent,
probably in the last 5 years. Yeah. I mean,
terrible trade. And I think too, why, and this is the last thing, Ryan, and then we're going over to you, but why there's also been some dissenting players is I think they see it too. Like, look, you're not building in different ways. We are competitive because we have Russell Wilson as quarterback. Like, we're competitive in spite of our coach and GM, because Russell Wilson gets us out of a bind, because Bobby Wagner is as good as he is in the middle of that defensive unit. But they're never able to get over the hump because they're not given the pieces to succeed. And the NFL, you know, guys are smart. Like, they know, like, I'm going to go somewhere where they want to build around me. I'm going to go somewhere where LA, the Rams, are literally stacking the deck every single offseason, trying something new. They're just cutthroat to get to wins, and I'm going to go be with that. And now Bobby Wagner being cut. And here's another fun thing. Doesn't go against the compensatory picks because he was cut. He wasn't a free agent. So the Rams won't lose one next year, which is a huge thing with Les Snead. But Ryan, just talking Bobby Wagner, now we know, you know, what the Rams' weakness on defense was that middle of the linebacking core with Troy Reeder. I know Traven Howard kind of came on at the end of the season. Ernest Jones, who's going to be a bright young star, but still just a second-year guy. So for you, what do you think Bobby Wagner just brings to this defense in the intensity, the leadership, and also, you know, 170 tackles? How much of an upgrade is that over Troy Reeder?
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. You go back to my articles. I did the key matchups articles throughout the 2021 season. And if you go through those, it's like maybe every other one of those, I was hammering the middle linebacker position over and over and over again, because that was such an area that they just did not have any respect for. And I was thinking, Bobby Wagner is kind of a conundrum for them, because for the last 2 seasons, they've been training me and other Rams people to think that they don't respect the middle linebacker position. And that's been evident. They paid Corey Littleton $3 million in 2019, but ever since then, they haven't had a linebacker that they've paid over $1 million per year as of a cap hit in the last 2 seasons. And and that's kind of what we expected to happen going into the next season. So was middle linebacker an area of need? Absolutely. Is Bobby Wagner better than Troy Reeder? Absolutely. So it's an upgrade at the position, and there's a definite question about, did they maybe shift gears a little bit abruptly to beat the San Francisco 49ers 2 games a year? I mean, that's my concern there.
Yeah, I mean, so let me ask you this, Ryan. Stick with you real quick. Von Miller is one of my favorite players of all time, one of the best pass rushers of all time, one of the best in his position, best at what he does. But I think when you look overall at the roster, they had depth in the pass rush. It wasn't as good as Von, but they had depth, the true need. And me and Jamal were talking earlier today on the phone. I kind of was talking myself even more. I was already hyped on it, but I was talking myself more hyped on it, because when you really look at it, it's like, okay, Von Miller, big loss when it happened 2 weeks ago. It was, wow, how do you let that guy walk? You traded picks for him, and then you let him walk. He was so instrumental in that Super Bowl one, which he was. We're not taking anything away from that. But then when you look at with Terrell Lewis, with Garrett, with geez, I'm drawing a blank on his name right now, but there are other edge rushers that'll come to me in a second. Justin Hollins, there it is, who actually was playing phenomenal last year before he got hurt. When you look at that depth alongside Leonard Floyd, the real need and the real issue they had against teams like the Niners, the Titans, even the Packers a little bit, was stopping the run up the middle because they could not stop it at the second level. So for you, do you now, and I don't want to say because it just happened, but do you think this is almost better that they let Von, because you couldn't have both. There's no way they got Von and Bobby. Do you think it's almost better now that Von went to Buffalo and they essentially traded Von Miller for Bobby Wagner?
I mean,
I can
absolutely see that. I can absolutely see that argument to be made. They needed to upgrade in the middle. Absolutely. I don't know if they needed to pull the trigger this aggressively to address that need. I'm not saying this is a bad grab, but I do wonder. Well, let me address it. I will say this: like, he addresses a couple of needs, and he mitigates a couple of needs as well, because he can rush the passer, and he's also better in coverage than anybody else they have at the middle linebacker position. So I will say that he does address those two needs. He alleviates some of the slot coverage issues and some of the pass coverage issues. But what won them that Super Bowl is the fact that they could get to Joe Burrow so quickly that they basically just eliminated all of the fantastic receivers that the Bengals had, right? So I would have opted to probably try to grab somebody that was as dominant as Von Miller. Was that person available in free agency or the draft for the Rams at the 104th pick of the draft? Probably not. The Rams do like to draft like a 13-year-old boy, though, or not draft like a 13-year-old boy, but build their team like a 13-year-old boy would do it, because that's how I would have done it. I would, Bobby Wagner's available. Let's get that guy, and I think that's great. But
I love that analogy.
and in a way they do it, and in a way they've been really fucking successful at doing that.
Yeah.
But in a way, it's also concerning because there's still a need at cornerback for sure. And then also, I would like to see them be more overwhelming in the pass rush, which is what won the Super Bowl. But 2022 is a whole different season, and they're facing the NFC West again, and they're facing the AFC West again. And I'm going to say, if you're facing 4 games against the AFC West, you're going to have a good pass rush.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll go to you. What do you think about basically the trade Von versus Bobby and everything Ryan just said?
So I actually think it's an elite move. And Bobby Wagner, to me, is the best linebacker in football since Ray Lewis. Like, this is a real guy you're bringing into your linebacker room. You could say Luke Kuechly. You can say Patrick Willis. Those guys didn't play long enough. Bobby Wagner did it at a higher sustained level than those guys did. You could say Darius Leonard. Darius Leonard was on NFL Network saying Bobby Wagner is the best linebacker in the game. I bow down to this guy. And when you really break it down for your defense, you arguably have the best player at all 3 levels of the defense now. With Aaron Donald on the defensive line, Bobby Wagner at the middle linebacker position, and Jalen Ramsey in the defensive secondary. And let's be honest, this guy is a 6-time first-team All-Pro, including 5 straight from 2016 to 2020. Last year, a drop-off. Who would have thought? 170 tackles, second-team All-Pro.
Yeah.
Like, this guy is a baller. He's 31 years old. He's turning 32 in June. This guy can clearly still play. You want to talk about, productivity? This guy has never finished below 100 tackles in a season in his career. You want to talk about staying on the field, like durability? This guy has started 110 of his last 112 games. This guy is unbelievable, and he's one of the most versatile linebackers. I think people know him mostly for being the run stuffer that he is, but he's an underrated blitzer. And by the way, he does a really good job in pass coverage, lining up against tight ends in the slot, playing excellent defense there. The stat that blew me away, and it's coming into last season Bobby Wagner had more PFF grades over 90 in the run defense than below 80. Just think about that success level. This is a straight A student in the PFF world. This guy is an absolute baller. And if you're getting anything close to the guy that we saw in Seattle, I'm going to plant my flag. I think the Rams solidified themselves as the NFC favorites going into next year. If Bobby Wagner is the same guy that we saw in Seattle, could not be a bigger signing and arguably save their offseason, because losing Von Miller, you got to bring in something else. You're losing the pass rush a little bit there, but you're solidifying it with the run defense, which is what matters come playoff time when teams are trying to run the ball against you. Bobby Wagner is that dude, and if the Rams get anything close to that, watch out. LA is going back to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's such a fun debate because both are so important. Jamal, your thoughts? I know obviously you were very vocal about losing Von Miller, and we all felt the same way. And then they signed Allen Robinson a day later, which was a very intriguing move. But now it doesn't look as bad with the trade to Bobby Trees and now adding Bobby Wagner, excuse me. So, I mean, your thoughts on just the Bobby Wagner versus Von Miller situation. And also, and I'll throw it to you at this too. I mean, you got to look at money too. I mean, the money is, I know 5 for 50 versus 6 for 120, but when you really break it down, it's going to be basically each contract is probably going to be a 3-year contract. Von's came out to a 19 cap hit next year in 2023, $21 million cap hit in 2024. All that's dead money guaranteed. Whereas Bobby's, we don't know yet, but I'm assuming it's going to be more in the range of 9 to 11. So that thinking too, what's your thoughts overall on those trade-offs?
Yeah, Ryan, I think it's a very compelling conversation with, all Rams fans and their friends and family can have very compelling conversation. And I think, though, there's 2 dimensions of this conversation. There is the player. So going kind of comparing head to head Bobby Wagner versus Von Miller. Mm-hmm. And then there's a separate conversation about fit. How does Von Miller fit with the Rams versus how Bobby Wagner fits with the Rams? And I agree with everything that Will said, but Will, everything you said was centered on the first conversation. It was all about player versus player, and all the PFF stats. That's all very individual contributor focused analysis, right? I think from a fit perspective, and I think this is what Skinny T had to say, is you're essentially trading, upside explosiveness for your defense for downside protection, right? You're basically saying we're not going to be as susceptible to leaks in the second level of our defense from a run perspective, and we're not going to be as susceptible to open spaces in terms of zone concepts at intermediate levels of the field. But we're tightening that up, but what we're giving away is the explosiveness in the backfield. And when you look at how the Rams won their playoff games, when you specifically look at the lead that they had against Tampa Bay, 27-3, what led to that lead? Where, the famous picture of Brady's lip bleeding and all of that. I mean, it was sort of Tim Tebow-esque of back in 2008 with the Florida days. Was he had no time to get the ball out. When you look at where the situation was with the Super Bowl, we've talked about this time and again, Burrow had no time. And that was sort of the difference. I think sometimes we over-index a little bit on pass coverage. And when you talk about the elite quarterbacks, in particular in the AFC West, I don't care who you have defensively. If you give those guys enough time, they're going to pick you apart more often than not. And your only defense against that is a significant pass rush that gives them happy feet, that makes them get the ball out quicker than they want to, and really disrupts their rhythm. And so for that regard, I love the Bobby Wagner signing as a way of filling that void, that chasm, because as I said, this was a D- offseason until today. They were able to sort of get it back, but it's still sort of a B+ offseason, because all else being equal, I would have rather run it back with Vaughn and given him the money that he wanted than go with Wagner. Now, is that a significant drop-off? that sort of remains to be seen. Probably not. But it's still, from a fit standpoint, I'd rather have a two-headed monster pass rush and disrupt everything than, have a little bit more backside protection. Because let's not forget, we talked about this, right? Look where Jamar Chase was on the field when Aaron Donald imposed his will on that 4th down with Burrow. Look what happened with Brady when even he had a little bit of time. Jalen Ramsey got burned by Mike Evans, and everyone thought that was the $582,000 last touchdown ball that no longer is now, probably $578,000 less valuable. But even with these elite guys' time, it doesn't really matter that much what you have on the back end. You're probably going to get burnt. And for that reason, it's great that we got him, but we're not quite as good as we were last year.
Yeah.
Good one.
And, I think everything you said is, very valid. I think pass rush is arguably the most important thing you can bring to a defense. But price matters with the salary cap. There's no way they're paying that price for Von Miller. They've got a championship team. They've got other guys they had to pay, including Matt Stafford, getting that redone. If you're telling me you can get Bobby Wagner for essentially half the deal that Von Miller got, same amount of years, it's $120 million, I think, for Von, 60 for Bobby Wagner. I'm taking Bobby Wagner. You're not going to generate the same pass rush, but if you can get 60 to 70% of that with arguably the best middle linebacker I've seen since Ray Lewis, as I just said, I think that's a good trade. And I'm liking the Allen Robinson move a little bit better now too, knowing that they did address, some sort of playmaker on the defensive side of the football. If you're asking me to take, salary caps off or playing Madden, who would I rather have? I think I'm with you on Von Miller, but price has to factor into that. And I think the fact that Bobby Wagner for a discount, I think you got to go with him.
Doesn't matter. The price doesn't matter here because at the end of the day, it was the same amount of guaranteed money. And at the end of the day, it was still essentially, as Rye or Die said, a 3-year deal. And so, yeah, you're going to have a little bit of dead money hit on the back end, but I'd rather have that dead money hit with a couple of banners hanging, and then all the fans can sort of deal with the rebuilding years. When you know that Donald is going to be around 2-3 more years, the way he talked this offseason, I think it was a lot closer than people are sort of giving that credence. When you look at the way McVay talked this year, it's a 2-3 year window. And so at the end of the day, you have to think in terms of a 3-year span. And 3 years, it's the same amount of guaranteed money. So I think there's a lot of mathematical semantics on the back end of these contracts, and it's sort of fun to argue. But at the end of the day, what's actually going into these guys' pockets from a guaranteed standpoint over the next 3 years is the same.
3 years is an eternity.
What I'd argue to that, too, is Von didn't want to come back, clearly, because if they could have offered him the same amount of money, he didn't want to take it. This is a great backup plan in bringing in Bobby Wagner. I think this is as good as you can ask for in terms of getting a playmaker on the defensive side of the football. So I'm stoked on this. If you're in Los Angeles, I think Bobby Wagner is going to do big things for the Rams. I mean, you can't get Von Miller back. Give me a playmaker on the defensive side of the ball. You've solidified those 3 areas of the defense, the D-line, the linebacking core, and the secondary. It's not Von Miller, but it's a damn playmaker out there. And I think that's as good as they could possibly do. And they got Allen Robinson, too, I think is an exciting addition to the squad as well. So I think the Rams did as well as they could, knowing Von wasn't coming back.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Go ahead, Ryan.
They didn't know that Von wasn't coming back. They were actively making plays for Von Miller. They didn't know that he was going to take the money for the Bills. Exactly. And I don't think that it's a 1-for-1 trade. Absolutely. I think that, looking at the stats here, 2021, Bobby Wagner had 10 pressures on the quarterback, 1 sack according to PFF. That's not Von Miller stats, even at the half season that he did end up playing.
I'm not calling it a 1-for-1 trade, too, just to point that out there. I'm saying they affect the game in very different ways.
Yeah, very different.
They
play different
Wagner
positions.
is a guy that, calls
Absolutely.
the defense. Like, he's the general of that defense. He does
he'll
a
be the
damn
green
good
dot.
job of doing it, too. Like,
what?
What more do you want from
And to your point, I don't think he's going to be on the field for 100% of the snaps. I don't think he's going to be the green dot. I think they're going to keep that with No, I'm thinking John Johnson now. Jordan Fuller. I think they're going to keep that with Jordan Fuller now, but I think he's going to be in rotation with Ernest Jones. I don't think he's going to be the same kind of presence.
Let's ask that. I'll start with you, Ryan, and if everyone wants to chime in, they can, because we'll end with that, because that'll be the interesting thing. Because I think the Rams defense, if you know schematically what they do, what they did a lot with Brandon Staley, and then even now with Raheem Morris, is a lot of times they only have one backer sets. They run very secondary heavy nickel and dime packages, obviously using Jalen Ramsey as a star. They love Ernest Jones. They want to keep developing him. He's the obviously future there. I mean, I know they just signed Bobby Wagner to a 5-year deal, essentially probably a 3-year deal, but Ernest Jones, I would say, is the future face of that linebacking core. But I would assume now, Raheem Morris being a smart man, he is a smart coach, no matter what Rams fans think. He's one of the smartest minds, I think, in football. And he's going to want both Jones and Wagner on the field. So I think they're going to shift schematically a little bit, and that might mean taking away some of the secondary, which is probably for the better, because that's now the weak point. So, Ryan, do you think that is kind of the thought now is, hey, let's have both Jones and Wagner play, and we'll figure out on the back end how to switch things up and not have those lighter guys in the box, like having a Taylor Rapp play box safety. We'll have more Jordan Fuller playing, free safety in that center field position, Ramsey playing the star, and then we'll have literally our one corner in David Long or Rochelle, and then we're going to run 2 backer sets. I mean, what do you think schematically the shift is?
Yeah, I think this is the season that we learn if Raheem Morris is the Twitter version of Raheem Morris, or the Raheem Morris I think he is, which is a smart guy that knows how to run a defense, which is to say that he should keep the too high defense going on. I think he should keep not have as many linebackers running as possible. I think that's the goal, is to rotate Wagner and Jones in that role, depending on what he needs. Where Jones failed was that he's not as good in coverage. He's a fantastic leader and also a fantastic reader of the run. So I think that's where we'll learn what Raheem Morris is that if he decides to put Bobby Wagner as the green dot, I'm gonna have a big problem with that. And I think that's a wrong move because I think he's got fantastic defenders in Rapp and in Fuller, and that's what I wanted to see him stick with, staying high. Do
you think, Jamal? I'll ask you, or anyone really, could we see a scenario where, remember, one of 4 sacks on Burrow, one of those sacks was Ernest Jones. Mm-hmm. Could we see a scenario where Jones, just being a second-year player, they say, you know what, we're going to really pivot. Bobby Wagner's now our inside backer when we go 1 backer sets, and we're going to slide Ernest Jones to that outside edge position and let his rush from the edge. I'm not saying that's his strong suit, but we saw Justin Hollins do that in Denver. They moved him from edge to middle linebacker, and then now he's back on the edge with the Rams. Is that something we could see, Jamal? Or do you think, no, we'll just see a rotation?
No, Ryan, I think we're going to see a lot of variation, and I think that's an excellent point. And Ernest Jones's emergence, I think, opens up a lot of different possibilities of what you want to do with your linebacking room. I also think this is sort of more of a holistic decision, and it's not just something that's sort of unique to the defense. I think if I'm Sean McVay and I'm the CEO of the Rams, I'm thinking, okay, we just gave up Woods and essentially OBJ, most likely for a guy like Allen Robinson. So what have I lost and what have I gained? Well, I lose the ability to move the sticks. I lose the ability, in a certain sense. Obviously, I got Cooper Kupp, world's greatest receiver, but now I've sort of invested in more of a bigger play guy. And so now what does that mean in terms of offensive time of possession, offensive number of plays? And then what does that mean in terms of defensive number of plays and defensive time of possession? And I think what the Rams are betting on this year is that they're going to have a little bit more home run capability, and they're going to get more chunk plays with Allen Robinson. and be able to score quicker. And I think the overall defensive strategy is we win when we have more plays defensively. It's going to be sort of more of a bend but don't break type of situation where they're really going to be playing in between the 20s. And then really, I think Wagner's true value this year as a very valuable piece of the Rams machine is going to be red zone defense.
Yeah.
So, Ken as a defense, either through Ernest Jones, through Fuller, different looks schematically, are they going to play that game that truthfully Belichick and the Patriots have played now for a number, the last 5-6 years, where we're willing to give up the yards between the 20s, eat up time of possession, but we're really going to tighten the screws inside the red zone. And you're going to spend 6.5 minutes, on a possession and at best get a field goal. And then we're going to have our offense back on the field and really have big playability and create separation. Whereas before, I think, the offense was much more ball control and we were looking much more for big play capability out of the defense in terms of negative plays. I think that mindset is subtly shifting into what the 2022 Rams will look like.
That's a fascinating point. I don't disagree at all. I think that's makes a lot of sense. And I think Sean McVay is a guy that thinks chess-like moves, not checkers, as we hear all the time now talking with the Rams. But yeah, I think that's a great point. And to that point, and kind of ending with this before we get into some best case free agents for the Rams and the Chargers, we'll kind of move to that too. But before we move on to that, they brought Jamal and Ryan both brought up OBJ. Do you see a scenario where he is back with the Rams, or now is it seemingly more like he is probably not with the Rams and moving on elsewhere?
I think if Wagner didn't come to the Rams, there'd be a significant chance that OBJ could be returning, because he's a guy that's going to want to get, a decent amount of money. He's a big name within the sport. Whether you believe he can come back from that injury or not, that's a whole different discussion. I think this really opens the door for him to look elsewhere. And I'm interested to kind of see how his recruitment goes in the free agency world. There's still some guys out there that he's really close with. The team that I'm looking at that would make sense for him is actually the Cardinals. He lives in Arizona in the offseason. They've lost a lot of guys, whether it's Christian Kirk, Chandler Jones. They got a lot of cap space there. So I think that's a realistic opportunity. But, they went out and they got Robinson and then they paid another guy. I think they've kind of made their, stance pretty clear. Either you're going to take a significantly less amount of money than you're looking for, or you're going to have to walk somewhere else. So I think OBJ is likely on the move. I think that's the realistic destination for Odell.
Yeah. I know they've come out and said the ball's in his court. They want him back. Obviously, I'm assuming that means an offer was made. We don't know what that offer was. And it is what it is. I think so much with these guys, and I would assume all on this panel would agree, but a lot of it's, respect and, what they think they're worth, because when it comes actually to money, OBJ is going to make, if he lives in LA, he'll make a buco bucks just living here in LA doing endorsement deals and showing up in club appearances and being on Hollywood sets and movies. Like, it's not the money, it's more the respect factor. Like, okay, wow, they did, I made the Super Bowl run, they didn't offer me that. But I think if he looks past that, again, we don't know the dollar figures, but if the Rams, I think, made a decent offer, which usually they do. I don't think they usually downplay these guys overall. Maybe a little bit, obviously, Von Miller choosing the Bills over them. There's a shot, but again, we don't know what Wagner's cap hit is yet. So we have no idea how much money they have left to spend this year. And I don't even know how they make it work. The funny thing with these Rams guys is, as soon as Bobby Wagner signed, you see everyone on Twitter, like, how are the Rams signing everyone? What are they doing? Like, I don't get it. And let's do that before let me ask you, Ryan, I'll ask you, before we move on to just more free agents, the Rams, and, there's a few other teams that do it, but it's mostly the Rams. But they're not doing anything outside of the intelligence of just moving dollars and changing contract language. But you see other teams that just don't do it at all. Literally, there are teams that do not restructure contracts. Like, it's literally, they sign a contract and that's it. Like, that player's in that contract until their contract is over. Why do you think that is? That's a weird question to ask you, but it's just bizarre to me that so many teams aren't malleable with how they move money around. They want to just say, all right, here's your deal, and we're just going to write it out until we free up cap space in 5 years when you're off the books.
Yeah, I have no idea. It's really hard to fathom exactly like why one guy, Tony Pastores, has an idea. Other guys have these same ideas, or can view they look at the thing and it does the matrix thing where it moves around, where like they're just like, oh, I see, I know kung fu now, and they can just move shit around in their brains. Because none of us really understand it though, outside of it, because we're wondering, okay, so 10 million per year for this linebacker, what does that mean for our cap space? We don't know yet. We'll find out one day. It's just there is a certain matter of a progressive way of thinking of things. And then there is a way of thinking of it that is more structured, and it just comes from the lineage of which you come from, right? Mm-hmm. So hire the guys that know how to move the money around, and you're gonna have a better squad, dude. It's just the way it is. Like
cookie crumbles, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Bruce Almighty.
I interject on that. I think that a lot of it has to do with the strategic clarity with the Rams. And I think when you operate if we sort of leave the luxury of the Los Angeles Rams and you look at the greater NFL landscape and you see that there's 10 new head coaches this year, and that the average lifespan of a coach is basically 2.5 years. It's very hard to start making decisions as a foundation for subsequent decisions to be successful from sort of a global optimum standpoint, because you don't know whether your guy is going to pan out and you got to reset the deck. So you have so many teams that are going after this sort of local optimum solution, which is not the global optimum solution. Mm-hmm. But when with the Los Angeles Rams that you have the ace, in the hole that is Sean McVay, A, and you also know, B, that he's not going to be there that much longer. That provides a lot of strategic clarity, because I can't possibly imagine that this Sean McVay kind of retirement news was new. I think that a lot of the organization knew that there was a sense of a timeline with McVay. And when you have your guy, and when you only have your guy for a certain window of time, that provides a strategic clarity that enables you to play chess within that window that other teams just can't play, because they don't even know whether they have their guy or not.
And I think that so Sean McVay is the grandson of John McVay, who worked with Bill Walsh. Mm-hmm. And Bill Walsh famously said that no executive should work more than 10 years in one organization. And that's an interesting idea, because the ideas that we're talking about how, like, you could move money around, that wasn't around necessarily 10 years ago.
Yeah.
That was like the Green Bay Packers are still working on an archaic system, and
they're moving like sundials still up in Green Bay.
Yeah. They're moving the what's that called? The abacus.
What is that called?
Abacus. They're doing the abacus, and they're going like, and Tony Pastores is doing 17 abacuses to go like, okay, we're gonna do this. So I think that Bill Walsh had a really fantastic idea of innovation and bringing new ideas into the organization. I think Sean McVay has that, which he's not going to overstay his welcome with the Rams organization, because that's I do believe that's a part of his DNA.
Interesting. Go ahead, Will. You had something to say?
Yeah, my answer is pretty boring when it comes to it. I just think some people are willing to push the box and look at all different angles, on how to restructure a team and kind of, look at the salary cap. Tony Pastors is one of those guys in the league. There's a bunch of other people. For instance, the 49ers have a guy named Adam Peters who does the exact same thing, looks at the salary cap, crunches it, looks how they restructure deals, make different areas go there. And then just some people just don't do it. Like, many people were banging their fists on the table saying, invest in Bitcoin, do this. And some people are just like, nah, like, I just don't get it. I don't understand it. I'm just going to be me. I'm not going to change. I'm not going to, look at ways to improve myself. It's just kind of a Darwin evolution thing. Some people look to improve. Some people just stay the same. And that's kind of the NFL's way of thinking in some areas. So, the Rams are doing it the right way and looking how to restructure deals, looking how to take money off the cap. And they're ahead of a lot of teams in the NFL in doing that. And that's a reason why they're looking to repeat as champions within the league.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's fun to watch. Obviously it's fun to cover, but it's funny to see. Cause even a team like the Chiefs, Jamal, when you bring up how the Rams kind of know what they have their guy, but there's also the, not fear. Cause like you said, I think the organization knew, but the thought process in the back of the mind that, hey, we have this window with McVay. Well, the Chiefs have that, I think, with Andy Reid, who's, had some family stuff going on. I don't know if it's going to be Bieniemy overtaking for him or what, but he's up there in age. He'll probably be leaving this year now. I mean, they're in this window with Mahomes now is on his new contract, $45 million cap hit because of this crazy deal that Brett Veach, their GM, gave him. And they go and they trade Tyreek Hill, and they do they're losing Tyrann Mathieu. They're a team I thought was kind of going tit for tat with the Rams and how they do things. And in this year, they just set back and they say, okay, I guess they can't do that. And then the Rams go ahead and say, no, we're just going to keep going. We're just going to keep the wheels turning to keep doing this. And it's just kind of fascinating to watch because it's one of those where it's odd how it works, but then it's more odd how just more teams don't do it. Because obviously it works somehow, and how are more teams not doing it? And I think if the Rams now win 2, 3, 4, whatever more championships, then it's going to be okay, this is the model now to do. But if it's one and done, and now we see them just kind of be competitive but not there, then teams will stick in their ways and stay with the, we'll just stay chalk in the draft, stay chalk in free agency and with the salary cap. But it's fun as hell to cover because it's never boring. That's for sure, right? So,
well, and I think that the Chiefs set themselves up nicely with the Tyreek Hill trade. I think that's fantastic. I think they got a nice.
You like that trade?
I like that trade
for the Chiefs.
Oh, I'm kind of on the other end for there. I think, outside of Aaron Donald, is there a player that is more irreplaceable at his position than Tyreek Hill? What he does as a speed demon, and granted, he's probably on the back half of his best years, but I still think he's got 2 to 3 really good years left in him. I mean, let's go back to that Bills game. They need to score in 13 seconds. Who else can do that but Tyreek Hill and Patrick Mahomes? This guy.
That was Kelsey. That wasn't even Hill.
Well, no, Hill made the catch. The
first catch.
Kelsey, yeah,
the first.
And then, I mean, you look at Hill in that game too. He had 2. He was almost going tutty for tutty with Gabriel Davis against the Bills, man. And it's just say what you want about Tyreek Hill off the field. He has his issues there, but man, when he's on the field, I remember that game he had against Tampa. It was 372 yards and 3 touchdowns. I've called him the best receiver in the league, and that may not be a popular opinion here because at any given time, this guy can take one to the house. He is the most dangerous receiving threat in the game. I don't think that may be arguable. So for my money, I thought that was a bad trade, and I'm really interested to see what Kansas City does because from my point of view, I think they got a lot worse for a team that was up 21-3 in the AFC Championship that could have easily gone to their 3rd straight Super Bowl.
Yeah. So go ahead, Ryan.
Here's my argument to that. So, 20 years ago, they would have said the same thing about Herschel Walker. I think that the Herschel Walker trade would have been considered a bad trade, or maybe whoever the Minnesota Vikings won that trade because they got the best player in football, and Tyreek Hill may be the best player in football, and the Kansas City Chiefs are probably going to draft a really fantastic receiver. And I think they got a good haul, and they can get some offensive linemen. I think they can get some other people that are going to make their team really fantastic. And I will say that, like, they're going to move to a more San Francisco type of offense where they're going to run the ball more, which may be the future of offense, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
What I would say to that is they're essentially taking guaranteed money and they're putting it all in the lottery, baby. They're letting it ride. The draft is a gamble. You don't know who you're going to get with that. You're putting your money on the table saying, you know, I'm hoping it's all on 5 if you're playing the
They got a haul, though. They got a haul. They got
draft picks. They're not guaranteed products.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is like,
and that's what
you have a guaranteed thing like that.
The Cowboys got too.
The Cowboys got draft picks, but they hit on those draft picks. They gambled and they won. That's the difference.
And the Chiefs haven't drafted well.
That's what I'm saying.
And the Chiefs have not drafted well.
You look at their last like 4 or 5 drafts, like it is up there with like Seattle in terms of how bad it's been.
But,
so,
what I'm curious to see,
the way they have been defended recently is a too high defense. They might go to an offense that is able to beat that, which is the San Francisco offense, and I think that's a plausible way to go.
That's true.
Hey man, like I'm excited to see them play next year. I'm definitely not going to write off a team with Patrick Mahomes, most talented quarterback I've probably ever seen. All I do know is you're significantly better with Tyreek Hill than without, and I'm just interested to see what that looks like next year for them.
What I'm curious to see, and last thing,
it comes back to that question of strategic clarity. You know, where you've signed Mahomes long term. I agree with Will. I think in the near term, the Chiefs are no longer the favorites in the AFC, and I would go as far as saying the Chiefs are no longer the favorites in the AFC West. I think that's the other team in LA at this point with what they've done. But because you have signed Mahomes to basically a decade-long contract, and how long is Andy Reid going to coach? I agree with you, Ryan, that a lot has happened in his life. He's got a lot of tread on the tires. But he also seems like he's a lifer. And we could be in a situation here with the Chiefs that they're thinking of themselves more as the Patriots of the late 2000s and the early 2010s, as they were sort of shifting their dynasty, versus the team that we kind of think of them as sort of this team that has sort of a 6-year window, and they're in year 4 of it, and they have 2 more years of prime Kelsey and prime Hill, and they need to maximize it. And so I think there's probably a little bit of friction from a strategic clarity perspective in that Kansas City Chiefs offices, versus the Rams know for sure, like, we got 3 years, and there's, as Rick Pitino said, right, Sean McVay ain't walking through that door, my friends, in 2026. Like, there's only one Sean McVay, and that window is going to close for the Rams in 25 or 26 for sure. And so let's go all in while we can.
Go ahead, Ryan. You wanted to say something else? Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, and they have to make these draft picks work. They don't have any other choice. They're paying their quarterback a whole bunch of money. They have to do it, and they don't have the money to pay. So I think that's the way to go. I think it's a good trade. But
what I'm curious to see with Hill, and this is just coming from someone that played receiver in high school, not very well, by the way, but I did play. There is no position in football, maybe in sports, that is you're more reliant on someone else to be good. Outside, and this is an interesting question, when you look at the top 25 receivers of all time, outside of maybe Randy Moss during his days with Randall Cunningham and Dante Culpepper, and Terrell Owens, maybe with, Jeff Garcia and some others, all those top receivers, including Jerry Rice, had great quarterbacks. Jerry Rice had Joe Montana and Steve Young his whole career. Calvin Johnson had Matthew Stafford. We could go down the list of these guys that had great quarterbacks throwing them the ball. And I'm not saying Tyreek Hill is going to go and be a bum in Miami, but we'll see if there will be a drop-off at all when he's going from an Andy Reid pass-heavy college system with Pat Mahomes throwing the ball to now a Mike McDaniel, Kyle Shanahan running type system with Tua Tagovailoa throwing the ball. So when you look at it like that, and if he was demanding Devonta Adams like money, I think he's a great receiver. I think he's so dynamic and the speed is there. But when you're the Chiefs and you're saying, all right, you want this, and we're already paying our quarterback this, and we can get 5 picks when we just watched the Packers only get 2 picks for Devontae Adams, and we can get 5. Then I guess I get it, but we'll see what happens. I mean, he's a phenomenal player, phenomenal talent, phenomenal speed. I won't get into his off the field stuff because that's a different story. But receiver is the most contingent position on someone else, and we'll see how happy he is in Miami come 6 games if he's not getting the ball as much as he wants. So be fun to watch. But
yeah, he got paid, Ryan. I know. Hopefully that'll help alleviate the pain. But I completely agree with you. I think this is one of those deals where it's lose-lose. I don't think either side. I think both sides have actually lost because of the fit. It's not necessarily that. I think, Will, what you were trying to say is I don't think anyone here is arguing that Tyreek Hill is the best player in football. Hardly. Yeah. But Tyreek Hill is the most irreplaceable player for his team outside of, Aaron Donald, because of what you need to accomplish in that Pat Mahomes, Andy Reid offense of having that deep threat. And so Kansas City now loses the deep threat, and then Tyreek Hill now loses the great quarterback to show off how he's such a great deep threat. And so I think that, I think the NFL lost as fans because I think we lose kind of a great team and we kind of lose a great player.
Okay. Last, I always say last thing, but whatever. It's the podcast. We do whatever we want. So question here we'll go around the table. We'll start with Will. Josh Allen in his 3rd year made a huge leap. Bills go and get Stephon Diggs. They get some better receiving talent for him. Makes a huge leap. Obviously, it's year 3, so he's in the system. Tua is going into his 3rd year. Now he's got Jalen Waddle. He got Tyreek Hill. Do you think, Will, we'll see a huge leap from Tua? Or have we seen enough where jury's still out on him? Or do you think we'll see that leap?
I'm hesitant on that because at least with Josh Allen, I saw the tools to be successful. It's eerily similar to me to a guy that's in this draft class in Malik Willis, where the wow throws are there. You're going, you can't teach that. This guy is hucking it down the field, 60, 70 yards in the air. He's got mobility. He's able to run out of the pocket, throw on the run, you name it. The tools were there. Tua, I think, and by the way, he was a great college quarterback. I want to take nothing away from him. He was very fun to watch at Alabama. I've never been wowed by his throws. Outside of maybe the game winner he had in the college football national championship against Georgia. I've never been wowed. I've never stood up and went, wow, this guy, is up there with the Staffords, in terms of the arm strength he possesses. I think it's going to be a lot more easy for him. But I will say this, if it doesn't work next year with Jalen Waddle, who, by the way, was one of the more underrated storylines in all of professional football last year.
1,000 yards receiving.
Stud as a rookie from day one with the Dolphins. And like you said, a system that did not have a great quarterback last year in Tua. And if he doesn't have success with Waddle and Tyreek Hill, who, by the way, might be the 2 fastest receivers in the NFL as well, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
I will say this, too, to touch it back to Rams. The quarterback, the lack of the quarterback situation that you were mentioning with receiver success, that should make Rams fans very, very excited about Allen Robinson. And, this guy has put up monster years. I mean, I'm looking at his stats right now. 2015, 80 catches, 1,400 yards, 14 touchdowns. His quarterback was Blake Bortles there, who we can agree was one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the NFL over the last decade plus. 2020, 102 catches, 1,200 plus yards, 6 touchdowns with Mitch Trubisky, who had a terrible stint in Chicago. Ask any Bears fan how they feel about Trubisky after he was selected before Mahomes and, Deshaun Watson, guys like that. Allen Robinson's got talent. And to your point, he's put up huge numbers without that sustainable quarterback. I got the list right here. He's been thrown to by Bortles, Trubisky, Foles, Justin Fields rookie year, Chase Daniel, Andy Dalton, Henny Bray, and Brian Walters, who I've never even heard of as a quarterback.
Brian Walters.
Hey, he's coming into a guy with Matt
Sounds like an accountant.
Yeah. Who's that dude? Is this guy in NFL Europe or something? I don't know what's going on there.
He was the Bears CPA, and he just suited up one day.
Yeah, I mean, they couldn't find Trubisky. He was out the night before. They go, Walters, just get in there, man. We need something. So, when you put in a guy like Stafford for Allen Robinson, this is the first legit quarterback he's had. By the way, for Stafford, who's coming off of a Super Bowl win, his first playoff win for that matter, confidence has been going through the roof. Allen Robinson might be like a sleeper fantasy pick in a lot of these leagues this year because I think he's going to have a great year for the Rams. I'm excited about that.
Yeah. All right, gentlemen, let's look at both. We're already at an hour. I love it. We could talk all night, I'm sure, but I don't know if everyone wants to listen to us. Maybe they do. Who knows? But let's look at the Rams and the Chargers now. Chargers, like I said, beginning of the show, about 18 million in cap space. Rams are probably scraping the barrel at this point. I'm sure they'll do some magic and free some more up, but at this point, it looks like all they have left will be to pay their rookies. But you never know, so we can play like they'll have money. So let's talk about some potential still free agents out there. I mean, we talked about OBJ. I won't say all the big names because I want to toss it to you guys, but some potential guys that you think these teams could still sign. Let's start with the Chargers. We haven't talked about them yet. I don't know who wants to start. I want to put anyone on the spot because I know we've been talking more Rams and none of you guys truly technically cover the Chargers, but Chargers have been great in free agency thus far. They could probably still add a little bit of depth on secondary if they want to. Obviously, they got JC Jackson, the big fish. But if they wanted to add a second piece, like a CB4 or 5, they could. The D-line, they did great with Austin Jackson and Sebastian Joseph-Day from the Rams. So they really solidified that. Obviously, they got Khalil Mack in the trade, but, outside of Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, they have a second-year player out of Duke. And after that, there's really no depth, so maybe some edge depth. Offensive line really is probably the biggest need. Right tackle, they got Storm Norton still as their starting right tackles. They need offensive line help. So kind of giving you those positions. Running back, another one where they need depth after Austin Eckler. Justin Jackson was a free agent. They haven't re-signed him yet. And so those are some positions of need. So I don't really want to put anyone on the spot, but if anyone wants to jump in, let's start with the Chargers. Any free agents out there that you think they could still maybe go after because they do have money to play with before we get to the draft and their 10 draft picks they have?
Yeah, I think when I look at the Chargers offensive line, specifically that right tackle, they could address that in the draft as they still have their first round pick. There's two guys. Eric Fisher, former number 1 pick from the Chiefs, had that serious injury, in the playoffs for the Chiefs 2 years ago. Has not been exactly the same guy, but still a similar talent level there. You plug him, next to a Rashawn Slater on the other side. I think that's an option you can go with. And then Darrell Williams, the offensive tackle from Buffalo last year, that, really solid starter. He's not going to wow you with anything. I think that's a good guy you can go to. And then if you're going to go for edge rushing, I know he's been an absolute bust in Detroit. Trey Flowers. I mean, that guy had he was one of the top marquee free agents a couple of years ago when he went and signed with Matt Patricia. We all know how that worked out, but you're looking at a guy that's hungry, that has talent, that could be there, for maybe a cheap deal. Trey Flowers is a guy I look at because you need that edge depth. Why not get a guy that's, won a couple Super Bowls out in New England to bring that leadership to the locker room to show what you need to do come postseason time?
Yeah, love all those guys. Anyone else want to jump in, or do you want me to jump in here?
Yeah, Ryan, I think it's a little bit of a trick question, truthfully, because I would do nothing if I were the Chargers. I would actually spend the time to really focus on the draft. I think that I think there's kind of 3 areas now where you're sort of, 3 or 4 areas where you're really trying to put the finishing touches on your offseason. You mentioned edge rusher depth. I think you want to bolster a little bit of the O-line. I think you want to have another back to sort of help alleviate some of the tread on Eckler. And I think that you also maybe potentially want a third receiver. And I think you can get all of those things in spades in the draft. And I think you can get it for cheap and set yourself up in a position where you're potentially looking at anywhere between an 11 and 12 win season and making a run at the division, and then having that cap space ready to know exactly what you need to deploy in 23 in the event, you sort of fall short of your expectations. I think sometimes when we've talked about the archaic thinking of NFL GMs at times, I think this is a trap here, where just because you have money doesn't mean you should spend money. All the quality at this stage of what you need is kind of off the board in terms of what you're focused on and what your budget is. And I would sort of spend the time to really double down on my draft evaluation and make sure I get those picks right, because I'm looking for depth, I'm looking for support players, and I'm looking to sort of bolster some areas.
Yeah, I agree overall. In my opinion, I think they need to add someone on the offensive line still. I would love to see them re-sign Odeabushi. I think that makes too much sense, and they can get him for literally $1 million. I'm surprised they haven't signed him yet, to be honest. I know he's rehabbing from injury, but played great before injury, and again, he's so cheap, and he was playing really well before that. So I think that, honestly, I think that will happen. But I would still add a tackle, some sort of depth tackle, just because at 17 in the first round, you don't want to just rely on a guy falling to you, right? Like there's no reason Rashawn Slater should have fallen to 13 to them. I mean, they got lucky last year. You can't bank on this year another quality offensive lineman falling into you at 17. And I know there's some great depth guys you can get in the third round. They don't have their second round pick because they traded it. But I mean, you look at some of these veteran guys that take a flyer on. I mean, David Questenberry out of Tennessee. I've talked about him a lot. Not great in pass pro, which I know is a concern, but phenomenal in run blocking. One of the top run blocking tackles in the game. And if you can just get him a little better in pass pro, or even just put a chipper on his side, or put the tight end on his side, which usually will line up the tight end on the right side anyway, that can help in that regard. And what about this, guys? Let me throw this name at you, who was phenomenal in New England and just a bust in New York. But Nate Solder was a guy who had a good career for New England. He's sitting out there, and why not take a flyer on Nate Solder for a couple $1 million and see if he can play better in this New Orleans Chargers system now that we've created out here, and just at least not put the pressure at pick 17 to be forced to take an offensive lineman. Because I don't think you want to run into training camp with Storm Norton and a third or fourth round pick as your tackle, or Trey Pipkins, who was your kind of development guy. So overall, I agree. I think they're pretty much set and just focus on the draft, especially with 10 draft picks. But I really think they need to add at least one more offensive lineman, probably two, just to at least not pigeonhole yourself in that first round. Because then if you get to that first round and one of those guys falls, I mean, you guys, let me ask you, Will or Jamal, who you love as those positions, but what, like a Trevor Penning, these other, tackle guard position guys, if they fall, great. But if they don't fall, then you're like, okay, cool. I can take a Garrett Wilson, a Chris Olave as my wide receiver 3 now, who is that's a phenomenal wide receiver 3. So I just think there's some value there to add with your $18 million. Why not add 2 more offensive linemen and then go into the draft with an open mind and say, hey, whoever falls to us, we're stoked on. We're not pigeonholed.
Ryan, there's actually sort of a domino effect play here where there's a ton of value at 17. This is a very deep draft at defensive line. This is a very deep draft at offensive line. There's, you've got some guys, and and especially with some of the issues of injury with some of the guys at wide receiver, there's actually a play to get a very high value pick and parlay that potentially even into a trade for what you actually need at really great value. I mean, Johnson from Florida State is somebody who just everybody's salivating over. And I know that, the Chargers need some edge rushing depth, but you could parlay a trade with Johnson to just about anybody else in the league and get a ton of value back. Jameson Williams, after he tore up his knee in the national championship game, there's a decent chance he's sitting there at 17, especially after you see,
Can you imagine
Olave and Drake London off the board? There's a really good chance Williams is there at 17. When you look at who you've got kind of on the offensive line and some of the studs that are out there, the Chargers are going to have their pick of the litter, and they can decide whether or not they want to stick with that person or they want to parlay that person into a trade for a ton of value. And so, again, I think that there's really an opportunity where if you double down on your draft emphasis, you're going to get everything that you need. That is, I think, talent greater than what's available on the free agent market. And why take flyers on guys just because you have the money to spend? Why don't you actually get high quality pieces that you actually want? And I think you can do that with the draft and subsequent trades.
So I don't disagree with you, but let me just ask you this as devil's advocate. So say at 17, Jameson Williams falls, and you can't pass on him at 17, right? You're able to have Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Jameson Williams, and Josh, their other fourth receiver. So you take him. Do you feel good about going into training camp, though, with Storm Norton as your starting right tackle?
You don't. You don't. But then I think that at that point, Ryan, then I think the guys that are still available are the ones that are still going to be available, after day 3 of the draft. And so I don't think that you necessarily need to make that decision here. And then you can sort of make that choice. Like, now we've got, arguably a top 6 pick that we got at 17. Do we really even want to part with this guy? We're going to have postpartum depression if we let this guy go. And then let me go shore up the offensive line. But I think you lose a lot in terms of kind of the time value of what you're going to gain by going and taking flyers from guys right now. Let the draft play out and then then tighten up your roster finally leading into summer camp.
Well, that's a great point, because I myself forget that too. Is there's a lot of moves that happen in May, after the draft. There's a lot of signings that happen, and there's a lot of big names out there. So, that's a good point. We'll see what they do, and they seem to be pretty comfortable with where they're at right now. And it's crazy, guys. We're literally April 1st. We're 26 days away from the draft, which is insane. Yes, 4 more Thursdays from being in Vegas.
It'll
be awesome, man. Yeah. We got a lot more content coming too on Draft is in Session. So it'll be really fun.
Yeah, make sure to check out Draft in Session. So before we pivot to the Rams about last free agent ads, just because we're talking draft, I have to ask Will and Jamal this, because I saw your last episode. One of Jamal's favorite, most talented players is this guy. And Steven, our writer for the Chargers, actually did a Chargers mock draft and mocked him to the Chargers in the 3rd or 4th round. And that's running back James Cook from Georgia. How great, with Eckler and James Cook, how much fun would that backfield be?
Oh, absolutely incredible, Ryan. And I'm a huge fan of Cooks. I think he's the 2nd best running back in the draft. And I think he's getting rated at, anywhere between 6 and 9. I think the things that he can do in terms of run with power, run with speed, catch out of the backfield, provide so much versility. I sort of compared him to sort of the 5-tool baseball player as sort of a 5-tool running back. I think if you can can you imagine the scenario where you get, Jameson Williams and, you get Cook. At that point, you could argue that the Chargers have a better chance of winning the Super Bowl than the Rams do next year. As crazy as that sounds.
Especially with the defense they added in the free agency.
Exactly. And so I'm huge on Cook. I think it would be a match made in heaven. I actually think the original match made in heaven for the Chargers actually would have been Zach Charbonnet to the Chargers. But when Charbonnet decided to come back to UCLA, Cook is my guy. And I think it would just be a match made in heaven.
I love it. Will, let me ask you this, and then Ryan, we'll go over to the Rams. But Drake London is my wide receiver 1. I don't know if I don't know. I think he's your guys' too, but I freaking love Drake London. I know I'm biased, but I've watched him enough where I'm like, the dude just balls out. He brings so much intangibles. When I see these draft guys that just don't watch West Coast football, don't watch LA football, and they're like, he's just a big body jump ball guy. I'm like, you clearly have not watched.
The West Coast bias is so obvious, by the way, too.
It's unreal.
East Coast guys, these SEC guys that are up, they're not up late enough to watch the Pac-12 after dark or the late SC or Stanford games. It's cost us a Heisman or 2. Let's be honest. Christian McCaffrey should have a Heisman right now.
Yes.
No disrespect to Derrick Henry, but McCaffrey was the best player in the country that year. I'll take that to my grave.
The most dynamic player since Reggie Bush.
And then they saw the Rose Bowl, and you're seeing Twitter. It's, man, I should have voted for McCaffrey. It's like, just do your job. Like, this is what you're supposed to be doing. You know what I mean?
Stay up.
Drink
a Red Bull.
That was the biggest BS I can remember. But you make a valid point, man. At Drake London, it's disgusting what this guy can do on a football field. Everyone on the defensive side of the football knew exactly what was coming last year. USC was a one-trick pony with that offense, a younger quarterback in Jackson Dart getting a lot of time. Hey, just put some guys on Drake London. That's all you need to do. And guess what? He won like 90% of those times. Yeah. Just throw it up to Drake London. Absolute monster. He was on pace to, I think, like shatter some of like Marquise Lee's records for USC by the time he was going to be finished. 8 games. I think he had, over 100 catches. Guy was just a monster. You could throw him up in any situation. He's my wide receiver number 1. I'll hear arguments for some other guys. I think Jameson Williams, if he was healthy during this process, could have made a real case for that. And the guy that I've actually come around a lot more on after listening to some experts, kind of Garrett Wilson. I was not a fan at the beginning of the process. I just think this guy is lights out of his breaks, and I think he's got a lot of potential to be very successful at the NFL level. Olave's great. I'm really high on Sky Moore. Christian Watson's going to be a guy that, if you're looking at the measurables, if you're a combine guy, that's like the guy this year. There's so many good receivers, but I have a hard time putting anyone over Drake London. It's going to be interesting to see who's the first wide receiver off the board. Well, we're all going to be in Vegas, by the way. Is that factual?
That's the plan. Yeah, absolutely. We're making it happen. So, but my question for you, Will, was, so Drake London is our wide receiver 1, but if somehow he falls to 17, the Chargers have, there's no way that's happening. But if somehow he does in some alternate universe, because everyone that watches the Chargers fans, Chargers content creators, like, oh no, we wouldn't take Drake London because he's too similar to Mike Williams or he's too similar to Keenan Allen. Like, we need a burner. We need a Jameson Williams. We need a Chris Olave. We need a guy that, is going to be a speed guy. But to me, if for some reason he falls, there's no way you can't take him, right? I mean, do you agree with that? Or do you think GMs overthink things like, oh yeah, he doesn't quite fit what we actually need? Because to me, I'm like, I'm just taking the best freaking receiver in the land and we'll make it work.
No, I'm flat out with you. And we've seen this before. I remember coming into the 2020 draft and CeeDee Lamb was my wide receiver 1. And he just kept on dropping it. There's 2 receivers taken ahead of him, and Judy and Henry Ruggs. So it was just to the point where it's like the Cowboys are really going to get CeeDee Lamb with the 16th pick in the draft. Chargers are at 17. I could see a similar scenario happening to Drake London because there's no consensus number 1 receiver this year. I mean, I feel very strongly about Drake London, but I look at all these draft boards, everyone's kind of flip-flopping on their number 1. So it's more of just your opinion on the matter. There's a real chance that Drake London's there at 17. I'll stand on that because of just who these GMs believe is the best receiver on the board.
Ryan, there's one thing I'll add to that is for anyone that questions Drake London, there's 2 things that I want to point out. One is go watch the tape USC versus Colorado. That's it. Just go watch USC versus Colorado when 65,000 people knew exactly who was getting the ball every time, and just watch those catches. Drake London was wearing the Colorado Buffalo secondary. Just go watch that tape if you don't believe me. And the second point is this. The 2020 USC wide receiver room was an embarrassment of riches. When you look at, there were 4 100-yard receivers in that game against UCLA. It's never happened before, okay, in the history of the Pac-12 and in the history of the college football. When you look at who was those receivers, Tyler Vaughn's, okay, kind of a fringe NFL guy, he got cut. Michael Pittman Jr. and Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yep.
Look at what Michael Pittman Jr.'s performance has been in the NFL as wide receiver 1 of the Colts. Look at what Amon-Ra St. Brown has done for the Lions over the past year. And far and away, every coach on USC and every coach in the Pac-12 recognized that Drake London was the best wide receiver out of that group of 4.
Far and away.
What do you need to know in terms of proven commodity? You have 1,000+ yard receivers in the NFL that are proven, and this guy is orders of magnitude better than those guys.
Yep.
And really, the only issue right now was the injury, and there's a recency bias. The guy had 88 catches in 7 games. I mean, he was literally headed for a 150+ catch season.
Yeah.
The only time that happens is when you are on a fringe, Division I team. You're on some group of 5 team where they're just passing like crazy, or you were on sort of a Mike Leach, Texas Tech type team. When Crabtree had some ridiculous stats a couple of years with Texas Tech. Outside of that, and more of a traditional, power, pro style offense, you're never going to get anywhere close to 120 catches in a season, let alone 150 catches in a season. So this notion about Drake London not being the best wide receiver is really a joke.
It's insane. And just a easy comparison for those that don't. I mean, I feel that most people watch this show watch USC maybe, but when Justin Jefferson came out of LSU and did what he did with Minnesota his rookie year, and then his teammates and coaches said, "Oh, but Jamar Chase is better," and we saw what Jamar Chase now is in the NFL. Take what Jamal just told you with Michael Pittman, who many are saying is but a fringe top 10 receiver next year, at least in fantasy. Yeah. Everyone's like super high on Michael Pittman. Amon-Ra, who ended up finishing top 5 among rookie receivers after being a 4th-round pick with an archaic offense in Detroit with no talent. And all of them are saying Drake London is far and away better than these guys. That tells you all you need to know. This dude is a stud and going to be a baller.
And just to put this cap on Drake London, 88 catches, 1,000 yards, 7 receptions, or 7 touchdown receptions in 8 games. 6 of those 8 games, he went for 130 and plus yards. Like dominant stuff from Drake London. The dude is a baller, man.
I was at these games and I'm like, this offense is awful, and they know there's 3 guys on him, and they're just going to toss it up, and he's going to go make a play. So anyway, all that long diatribe or dialogue is just to say, if he's there for the Chargers 17, I don't care if he's not a 4-2 burner. The dude runs a 4.48. You take that guy and you make it fit because he's too talented a receiver not to.
Man, throw out the 40 times too. Like, just take the guy. I'm in. Can you stop this? That is where I'm at with Drake London. And the clear answer is no, you can't do it. Just take the guy you can't stop. Good things will happen for that.
Exactly. So, all right, let's do this quickly because I appreciate you guys. I think Skinny T's phone died. I think that's why we're probably not seeing him right now. I had to jump out of here. But Rams, last thing. Any free agents out there you think they can even go after? Or is it basically free agency's done for them? I know, guys like Jadeveon Clowney's out there still. We've seen fans pining for Stephon Gilmore, Tyrann Mathieu. I don't see how in hell they could afford those guys. I know we say how magician Tony Pastores is and Les Snead, but come on now. There's no way they can afford those guys, right? Or can they? What do you guys think?
Man, it's going to be tight, I think, especially if they're still considering bringing back Odell. I think that would probably be the one guy if they're still in talks with Odell at this point. If they were to address a position, I think Ryan alluded to this earlier, like, let's look at the second corner position. I think that's something that they really need to do. Outside of Ramsey, they got one of the best, if not the best, at that position. You want to solidify that other side of the football field. So there's guys out there. I don't know if they're like any quality guys that you can afford. I think Gilmore's out of their price range. I'm looking deep down the list. Maybe you could send it. I mean, Chargers fans could tell me if this is the wrong move. I mean, Chris Harris Jr. is out there. We'll see if that is something you want to look at. Steven Nelson, the corner from Philly, he's under 30. I don't know. I think you're probably better off taking some flyers in the draft on maybe some depth corners there than looking into the free agent market that's not really there anymore.
Yeah. Jamal, do you feel it?
I agree. I think that the Rams are just about in the clubhouse here. And I think, the overall assessment of the offseason has to be, we gave up Woods. We gave up OBJ. I think we have to start assuming that we gave up Woods, we gave up OBJ, we gave up Vaughn, and we got, Mr. Wagner, and then we got A-Rob. And I think that's how we sort of judge the offseason. And I think everything else is, very, very incremental noise in any sort of move that they make at this point. And I think at this point, you want to really focus on the draft and see if you can kind of pick up some needs, especially in the secondary.
Yeah, I agree. I think we'll know a little bit more when the cap hit for Wagner comes out for this season, to see what they have left to play with. And again, we haven't even mentioned it, but they're still in talks of Donald's extension. So will that move money? Will that cost more? Because that will happen. I mean, we've heard from Jordan Rodriguez. We've heard from other reporters that it's going to happen. It will happen soon. It's just a matter of when. So we'll see what that money shift looks like as Aaron Donald will now probably become once again the highest paid defensive player in the NFL, which is still crazy. Again, we joke about like, how are they doing this? It doesn't make any sense, but they're doing things. They're playing with house money. And
well-deserved too. Well-deserved too.
Well-deserved.
Donald, dominant. The real Terminator outside of college football, because the college football version is Zach Charbonnet. So
Yeah, exactly. So they'll make that happen, and then we'll be able to assess a little more as we go into the final 4 weeks before the draft. But last thing, gentlemen, we'll do it quick because I know I've kept you long already and it's getting late in the evening. But let's start with the Bruins. We got to do a little preview. I mean, just super quick preview of guys you're excited about, who you're kind of pumped on, because I know spring football doesn't give us a lot. We got practices just kicking off. I think last week is when they kicked off for both the Trojans and the Bruins. We got the spring game for the Trojans on April 23rd. Bruins will be right around that time as well. So Will, being the Bruins guy, our host of the Bruins Bible, obviously Jamal knows his stuff too, but just what's the hype factor with this Bruins team with, Ken Norton Jr. now being there as the linebacker coach? We got returning of DTR, Charbonnet, some other big fixtures. So what's kind of the hype and who are you looking forward to watching this spring?
Man, so there's two real areas that I'm looking for on the offensive side of the football. And that's the left and right tackle, who's going to shore up those positions. They've got a guy that transferred from Rutgers and Raekwon O'Neal, who's, a very solid transfer from Rutgers, made all Big Ten honors. He's not getting there till the summer. So in the meantime, they've been trying to shore that up with Garrett DiGiorgio and Josh Carlin at the left and right tackle. And let me say the first couple of days of practice have not gone well for those two guys. So I'm looking to see who they're going to really implement with those guys moving forward through camp. And then the other thing is I want to see who's DTR's new go-to receiver. His top two targets, Kyle Phillips, Greg Dulcich, off to the NFL. You've got some real dudes out there, whether it's Kaz Allen, Jake Bobo, the transfer from Duke, some other dudes. So I'm really looking forward to that receiver battle and shoring up the offensive line. In terms of the defense, I'm really looking forward to seeing the Murphy twins up close and personal. I've heard rave reviews from them from the first couple of days of practice. They really got to replace a Mitchell Agude-like talent who transferred to Miami earlier this week. Caleb Johnson is a guy that could step back in and really be an impact player there. He was like the best defender, arguably, in the 2020 season. Did not really play, up to speed last year because the linebacker room was very crowded. Azizi Hearn's a corner that transferred from Wyoming, a guy that I'm really excited to see. A lot of exciting pieces, but I think the two main areas are who's going to be DTR's receiver and who's going to be blocking for the guy that, I feel has a chance to win Pac-12 Offensive Player of the Year.
Love it. Yeah. A lot of excitement and a lot of, how do I say this? There's a lot of known commodities, but a lot of unknown factors and results and a lot of transfers coming in, which, I think bode well with Chip Kelly in the system. And I think there's things to be excited about in Westwood. And I think we're going to be excited to cover them all year. And I know Will and both Jamal are going to do a great job doing that. And but yeah, I think the biggest thing, like you said, is who's going to be Kyle Phillips' replacement. That's like the biggest unknown of who's going to step up into that role. Cause Kaz Allen, some of those receivers are great role play receivers, but who's going to be your possession guy when you got to have it on 3rd and 7, who's going to get that 3rd and 7 to go thing. So before we jump to USC, Jamal, I don't know if you want to add anything to UCLA and then we can jump to USC after that.
Sure. And I think that Will, I think said it best between, Raekwon O'Neal, the Murphy twins, Azizi Hearn, how, Jake Bobo is really sort of in line to potentially be the next Kyle Phillips, and then kind of who emerges as wide receiver one. Is it going to be Kaz Allen taking that momentum from last year? Is it going to be Cam Brown? Is it going to be somebody else? But the storyline, truthfully, that has kind of stolen the show the first couple of days of spring ball is Tyler Manoa, defensive lineman who has now shifted to offensive tackle. And so that has been the big surprise and the joker card that Mr. Chip Kelly is playing to really beef up that offensive line. I mean, obviously, when you talk about who is lost on the line, when you talk about Sean Ryan, Alec Anderson, I mean, you're talking about big time guys here that were instrumental in keeping DTR as upright as DTR can be in a given season. So Tyler Manoa going to the offensive tackle spot and seeing how quickly he can potentially learn that position and together with Raekwon O'Neal fill that void, I think is what has everyone buzzing on the UCLA side. Across town from an SC perspective, obviously it's all about how does Caleb Williams look. in his Beats by Dre headphones and in his, millions of dollars of NIL, can he squeeze in a few minutes a day of actually slinging the football? And all initial reports are that, he's been absolutely fantastic, and SC looks like an absolute force. I think that what has spoken volumes with USC football these last couple of weeks is just the absolute culture shift that has taken place from the Clay Helton era. Obviously a lot of SC hyperbole, and that is SC. SC is sort of Hollywood, and it's all about hyperbole, talking about, Lincoln Riley's first practice being the greatest college football practice in the modern era. But what I will say has been interesting is what Devin Barlow said yesterday. And Devin Barlow is in the running for, running back one this year for the Trojans, when he said that, look, we have a completely different mentality in terms of preparation and complexity of our offense. As running backs, when we didn't know what the play was, we sort of just guessed that it was going to be a swing pass, because that's kind of what, the air raid is. And so we really didn't even have to prepare very much. But with Lincoln Riley's offense, with the nuance, with the complexity, with the variation, and really with this notion of everybody kind of switching in and out. And I think Riley is sort of bringing, we started the show with Pete Carroll. It's kind of fitting that we'll sort of potentially end the show with Pete Carroll. Is, Carroll's whole mantra at the beginning was all about competition, right? And everybody's competing every day of practice. Everyone's competing for their position every chance they step out on the field. And that's the sense you really get with Lincoln Riley's approach, but in a slightly different way, because Lincoln Riley is really looking at depth. He wants to play a lot of guys, between 20 and 25 snaps, and you're going to have this rotating wheel of just depth of talent and freshness of talent that comes into play. So there's these Carroll-like elements, but it's in this very unique way where everything is going to be by committee. It's going to be wide receiver by committee, running back by committee. Everything is going to be by committee with the exception of Caleb Williams. And so I think a lot to be excited for if you're an SC fan. And I think that potentially, given the situation with the transfer portal, look, I don't think it's far-fetched at all to consider USC the favorite in the Pac-12 going into 2022. No disrespect to Utah, and I know our boy Stephen Haglund is not going to be happy with me when I say this, but I think we're potentially looking at a scenario for the first time since 2005 where USC, UCLA, I think, is going to decide the Pac-12 South, and I think those two running for the Pac-12 South all the way through. And my money is on one of those two teams, not only winning the South, but winning the Pac-12 in 22.
Love it.
Don't disagree.
Pac-12 runs through LA, man. Let's do this.
Because you look at UCLA, 8-win team last year, and bringing back their two biggest players in reality in DTR and Charbonnet. And then you look at USC, obviously what they've done, it's going to be a completely shift. And I think that's the big thing, Jamal. You nailed it. Is the excitement's about Caleb Williams, but the important thing is the culture change, and that's just so important in sports in general. And when you hear players that were there last year, it's a lot of time. And these are younger kids, not pros, because pros kind of just like, oh yeah, it's good, but it's fun kind of seeing these players say like, oh yeah, things are different. Like this is a different animal we're taking on. Like we're not just showing up and practicing. Like there's preparation involved. Because a lot of people always ask, it's like, well, what is bad about Clay Helton? Like what made Clay Helton bad? Because he was a nice guy. The players loved him. Like no player that went through his system ever disliked Clay Helton. But it's like you have those certain scenarios in life where just people you loved, but they just didn't prepare you for what you needed to accomplish. And that was Clay Helton to a T, unfortunately. And now I think Lincoln Riley, there's also that love factor. We'll see if that stands, but there's also the preparation allocation where it's like, okay, now we're actually getting better and we're preparing ourselves for the future. And we're seeing that. And we got to see it play out. But here we are 2 weeks into spring practices, but at least it's already being recognized. So a lot of excitement in LA with all of our 4 teams. A lot of excitement with these guys. Ryan, who was on here earlier, Rams beat writer, Jamal Madni at LAFB Jams, Will Decker at LAFB Network. We got the Bruin Bible. We got Draft in Session. We got everything you need right here on the LA Football Network. Gentlemen, as always, thank you for joining me. Appreciate you. Thanks for the friendship. Thanks for the good talks. Thanks for the great football takes. Appreciate you. Thanks so much.